I open the store before the sun does. Every morning, same order, same motions, lamp first, then the stove, then the bolt on the front door pulled back slow so it don't wake the town. Not that Miles City sleeps much in February, cold like this. Well, it keeps folks restless. You can hear it in the walls, that kind of cold. The wood contracts and the whole building groans like it's trying to remember what warmth felt like. My name is Beth Whitlock. I'm 31 years old, unmarried, and I run the dry goods counter at Harlan's General Store on Main Street. Mr. Harlan spends most of his time in Helena now, leaving me to manage the inventory, the customers, and the particular silence of a woman who has arranged her life into neat rows same as the shelves she keeps. Montana Territory in winter is no place for people who need softness. The mud freezes into ridges that'll break an ankle if you ain't careful. Chimney smoke hangs low over the buildings like the town is breathing, slow and laboured. Cowboys come in with frost on their mustaches, ranch wives with hands so chapped they bleed when they make a fist. I sell them salve and thread and coffee and flour, and I remember what they bought last time, and I ask after their children, and I sweep the front step twice even when it don't need sweeping, and I keep the good Arbuckle's coffee separate from the cheap stuff. That last part, honestly, that started as a business decision. Arbuckle's is the best coffee west of the Missouri. Cattlemen will pay extra for it. Cowboys who've been drinking creek water and burnt chicory for weeks will damn near weep when they taste it. But somewhere along the way, and I couldn't tell you exactly when I started setting one bag aside, behind the regular stock, where Mrs. Hargrove wouldn't grab it for her Tuesday order, where the hotel cook wouldn't see it when he came in buying in bulk, one bag. For one customer, he comes every 14 days, a line rider from out in the breaks country, stationed alone in some shack between here and the Yellowstone River, Caleb McCoy. Quiet man, tall well, most of them are tall, but he's got a way of standing that makes the door frame seem smaller. He takes off his hat when he enters, always. Even when his fingers are so cold they fumble with the brim. He buys salt, flour, matches, tobacco, sometimes saddle soap. He don't linger, don't gossip, don't lean on the counter the way some men do, like the store is a saloon and I'm entertainment. He orders what he needs. And when I pour him a cup of the Arbuckles on the house, I tell him. Because it's too cold for a man to ride back without something warm in him, he wraps both hands around that tin cup and he closes his eyes. I remember the first time he did that, the way his whole face changed, like the coffee gave him permission to stop being cold for 1 minute. I memorized how he takes it, black, no sugar, just the heat and the dark. That's just good shopkeeping. Remembering your customers, I set the Arbuckles behind the regular stock this morning. Same spot, same reason I don't examine too closely. Outside, the sky has that look, heavy, yellow-grey along the horizon, like a bruise forming, storms coming. Everyone in Montana knows that sky. I touch the bag of coffee once just to make sure it's there, then pull my hand back and go sweep the front step. A woman can't stand around touching coffee bags all morning. There's work to be done. The thing about 14 days is, well, it's a rhythm, like a heartbeat you don't notice until it skips. He first came in, September, maybe, fall of 83. The aspens were turning gold along the creek bottoms and the whole territory smelled like dust and dying grass. He walked in and bought salt and flour and stood at my counter like a man who'd forgotten how to be indoors. His eyes kept drifting to the window, checking on his horse. I asked him about the horse. Not because I care much about horses, I care the normal amount, I suppose, but because when I asked, his voice changed. It went soft, gentle in a way that didn't match his hands or his jaw or the dust ground into the creases of his coat. He talked about that animal the way some men talk about their children, careful, proud, a little embarrassed by their own tenderness, line riding his lonely work. Weeks alone in the breaks country, riding fence, checking cattle, sleeping in a shack with nothing but wind for company. The kind of job that either makes a man peaceful or makes him strange. Caleb McCoy got peaceful. You can see it in him, this stillness, not cold, not distant, just quiet. The way deep water is quiet. Every 2 weeks he rode in. Every 2 weeks I had the Arbuckles ready. And somewhere between September and December, I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way he said, ma'am, it changed with the seasons formal in fall, softer by winter, almost warm by January, like the word was thawing along with something inside him. The way he'd pause before leaving, stand at the door with his hat in his hands, looking back toward the counter toward me like there was something else on his list he couldn't quite name. Last time he came in, 10 days ago now, he did something different. He lingered, stood at the counter after he'd paid, running his thumb along the brim of his hat, and he opened his mouth. I watched the words form, watched them gather behind his teeth like horses at a gate. Then he closed his mouth, touched his hat brim, said, "Much obliged, Miss Beth," same as always, and walked out into the cold. I stood at the window and watched him ride toward the breaks country. His horse a buckskin, good-boned, steady picked its way through the frozen ruts on Main Street, and I watched until they were just a dark mark on the snow. I counted heartbeats. I don't know why. Got to 11 before I caught myself and turned back to my shelves. A woman can't stand at windows forever. There's ribbon to measure and flour to weigh, and absolutely no reason to wonder what Caleb McCoy almost said. No reason at all. The blizzard came 2 days later, and it came like it meant to erase the whole territory. I've lived in Montana long enough to know winter storms. They blow in fast, howl for a day, and move on. This one was different. This one settled in like it had nowhere else to be. The sky went white, not grey, not dark white, like someone hung a sheet over the whole world and said, "That's enough. No more roads, no more fences, no more knowing where you are." 3 days. 3 days of wind that screamed against the clappered walls so loud I could feel it in my teeth. Snow piled against the store windows until I couldn't see the street. I kept the lamps burning because without them it felt like being buried alive, just me and the goods on my shelves and the sound of the world trying to tear itself apart. I kept the store open. Of course I did. People needed supplies. And routine is the fence I build against everything I can't control. So I measured flour and cut fabric and made conversation with whoever stumbled in out of the white. Worst one in years, the blacksmith said, stamping snow off his boots. Seen drifts chest high on a tall horse out past the stockyards. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Patterson murmured, fingering a bolt of wool. "Those poor souls caught out in the open." I nodded, arranged canned peaches on the shelf, straightened them until the labels all faced the same direction. Second day, 2 cattlemen came in, big men, sheepskin coats crusted with ice, faces raw and red. They stood by my stove and talked about losses, cattle freezing in ravines, fences buried, and the line riders, Lord, the line riders out in the breaks. "Man could die out there and nobody'd find him till spring," one of them said. "Them line shacks ain't built for a storm like this. And if a horse goes lame..." He shook his head, didn't finish. My hand stopped. Right there on the counter, between the canned peaches and the sack of sugar, just stopped. 3 seconds, maybe 4. An eternity made of silence and the sound of my own heart beating somewhere it shouldn't, high in my throat. Loud in my ears, like it had climbed up from my chest to listen. I picked up a can and turned the label forward, kept working. Behind the counter, near the stove, I found something I'd forgotten, an old tin bucket, empty, wedged behind a crate of lamp oil. I pulled it out, looked at it, set it under the spot where the ceiling leaked slow drips from snow melt working through the roof boards. Plink, 1 drop, plink, another. That night, lying in my rooms upstairs, I listened to that bucket catching water in the dark store below, drop by drop. Such a small sound, you wouldn't think you could hear it through the floor, through the howling wind, through everything, but I heard it. The way you hear your own pulse when the house goes quiet and there's nothing left between you and the truth of what you're feeling. Same rhythm, same patience, same stubborn refusal to stop. The blizzard broke on the fourth day. The wind died like a fever breaking sudden, leaving everything still and stunned and blinding white. Folks emerged from their houses, blinking, shoveling, checking on neighbours. Miles City dug itself out one doorstep at a time. And I counted days, 14 days since his last visit came and went, 15, 16. I served customers with perfect composure, I think. Mrs. Hargrove needed ribbon for her daughter's dress. I helped her choose between the blue and the green, and my hands were steady, and my voice was pleasant. And if I was listening for the bell above the door with every nerve in my body, nobody needed to know that. The bell rang at 10:30 on the 16th day. My breath caught this terrible, involuntary stillness, like my whole body was holding itself at the edge of something. It was the hotel cook. Needed 20 pounds of flour. Of course, I said, smiled, measured. My knuckles were white on the scoop handle, but he wasn't looking at my knuckles. Twice more that morning, twice more, not him, I started finding things on my shelves, things I'd set aside without admitting what I was doing. The Arbuckles, of course, but also a tin of saddle soap, better quality than what I usually stocked, a wool scarf, dark grey, good weight, the kind that'd keep a man's face warm in a Montana wind. I'd folded it too carefully for stock, placed it too deliberately. I kept things for him. That's what I did. An entire shelf of unnamed devotion arranged between the lamp oil and the harness leather, and I never once called it what it was. On the 17th day, I overheard two cowboys at the feed store next door. The wall is thin, and voices carry in cold air. Line rider's horse threw a shoe. I heard, somewhere between here and the Yellowstone, in the middle of that blow. Which rider? Dunno. One of the boys working the brakes for the Circle T, I reckon. I rearranged the same shelf 3 times that afternoon. Canned tomatoes, labels forward, then sideways, then forward again. I had no claim on Caleb McCoy, no understanding, no promise, no exchanged word that meant more than commerce and courtesy. I had coffee and a scarf and questions about his horse, and none of it gave me the right to stand behind my counter with my hands shaking and my chest tight and this awful, wonderful, terrifying feeling that the world had shifted and I couldn't shift it back. I had no claim on that man, no claim at all. So why did my hands stop moving every time that door opened? I found out on the 18th day. Opened the bag to check, I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to touch something connected to him and the smell was wrong. Flat, lifeless. The richness gone out of it, replaced by something dull and papery. Arbuckle's doesn't last forever, even in oilcloth. I'd saved it too long. The coffee that nobody else was allowed to buy. The coffee I'd hidden like a secret. It had gone stale while I was busy pretending it didn't matter. I stood in the storeroom holding that bag and something broke. Not dramatic, not weeping or falling apart, nothing like that. More like a wall that had been developing hairline cracks for months, finally gave way. Quietly, the way a dam breaks when the water has been pressing too long. I asked about his horse because his voice went soft when he talked about the animal. And that softness, God, that softness was the closest thing to tenderness I'd heard directed anywhere near me in years, maybe ever. Maybe. The scarf wasn't stock. I'd run my thumb across the wool so many times I knew its texture better than my own handwriting. The saddle soap wasn't a business decision. I'd chosen the better tin, the one that cost me 12 cents more. Because his hands cracked in winter and I couldn't stand thinking about it. And the coffee I knew how he took, not because I was a good shopkeeper, but because I watched his face the first time he tasted it. I watched his eyes close and I watched the tension leave his shoulders, and I heard this small sound he made, not quite a sigh, not quite a word, and I memorized everything. The way you memorize something sacred, something you know you'll need later, in the dark, when you're alone. Each admission pulled another brick from the wall, and underneath all the inventory management and professional courtesy, and I remember all my customers, was this: I was in love with Caleb McCoy. And a woman without a husband in Miles City is a woman who'd better have a reason to exist. And I had built mine out of shelves and ledgers and usefulness, because the alternative, the wanting, the hoping, the terrible fragility of needing someone who rides away every 14 days was more than I could bear. The bucket, I looked at it, there by the stove, a quarter full now, ceiling drips, slow and steady, gathering without anyone pouring, not empty, never really empty, just filling so slowly I didn't notice until I looked. That's what he did. Every 14 days, like water dropping into tin. He filled me. A question about my shelves. A much obliged Miss Beth. The sound of his boots on my floor, drop by drop by drop, until the woman who thought she was empty discovered she was full to the brim. I threw the stale coffee away. Then I went to the shelf and took down a fresh bag, new Arbuckles, unopened. I set it in the exact same spot, behind the regular stock, where no one would take it. Same spot, same hope, no more pretending. The next morning, I stood behind my counter and felt exposed, like the walls of the store had gone transparent overnight, and everyone walking past could see inside me every folded scarf, every hidden bag of coffee, every drop in that bucket. I wore my old composure like a coat that no longer fit. Same buttons, same fabric. But the woman inside had changed shape. It was Mrs. Hargrove who named it first. She was buying buttons, pearl buttons, for her daughter's Sunday dress. And she looked at me with that particular expression women use when they're about to say something kind and devastating at the same time. It's sweet, Beth, how you always save things for that McCoy boy. My hands went still on the button drawer. I beg your pardon. Oh, don't be coy, dear. She smiled, gentle, but well, the kind of gentle that peels your skin back. Everyone sees how you set aside the good coffee, the saddle soap, that nice scarf you folded up so careful. I felt heat climb my neck and settle in my cheeks. I keep quality goods for regular customers, Mrs. Hargrove, that's all. Mm-hmm. She selected her buttons and left the little smile on my counter like change I didn't ask for. After that, it was everywhere. The butcher's wife caught my eye through her shop window and tilted her head slow, knowing, the way you look at a horse that's finally figured out the gate is open. The hotel cook, who'd never been anything but businesslike, leaned on my counter and said, grinning beneath his walrus mustache, "You know, Miss Beth, I been coming in here 3 years and you ain't once saved me the good Arbuckles. Makes a man wonder what McCoy's got that I ain't." I opened my mouth to respond and nothing came out. He laughed, not unkind, just amused. And then the banker's wife, Mrs. Caldwell, she examined a bolt of silk she had no intention of buying, running her fingers across the fabric without looking at it, her eyes on me instead. "I do hope you're not saving that for someone who won't appreciate it, dear," she said. The words were smooth. The edges were not. Line riders do tend to drift. It's rather in their nature. I wanted to say something sharp, but the truth was she wasn't wrong to notice. She was just wrong about what she saw. It was old Mrs. Clary who saved me. Widow Clary, who'd buried her husband 20 years back and never remarried and never apologised for it. She came to the counter for lamp oil, waited until Mrs. Caldwell left, then leaned in close. Nothing wrong with keeping good coffee for a good man. Beth, nothing wrong at all. My throat closed. I nodded. That was all I could manage. I snapped at the next customer, a poor freighter asking about rope prices. The words came out sharp and cold, and the moment they left my mouth, I heard them and my hands started trembling. The freighter blinked, mumbled something, backed out. The store went quiet. I stood there behind my counter with my palms flat on the wood, breathing, listening to the silence that follows when a woman who never loses composure suddenly does. I closed the store early, walked home through streets so cold the air hurt my lungs, with my arms wrapped around myself. My rooms above the store were small and tidy and achingly quiet. I stood at the window looking down at Main Street. Empty, everyone had somewhere to go, someone to go to. Valentine's Eve, the 20th day since his last visit, 4 days past due. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and constructing very carefully, very rationally, every explanation that didn't involve something terrible. He found another route, another store, a shorter ride to some other town with some other woman who kept some other coffee behind some other counter. Each explanation was perfectly logical. Each one felt like swallowing winter air, that sharp, chest-deep ache that steals your breath and leaves you gasping. Around midnight, I got up, put on my shawl, went downstairs in the dark. The store was silver and shadow moonlight coming through the frost on the windows, the stove long gone cold, the shelves like quiet witnesses. I walked to the storeroom, my bare feet on the wooden floor, so cold it burned I was going to put it all back. The arbuckles back on the general shelf, the scarf unfolded, placed with regular stock, the saddle soap just soap. I was going to erase every trace of wanting, every piece of evidence that Beth Whitlock had made the oldest, most foolish mistake a woman alone can make. I was going to make myself safe again. And I understood, standing there in the dark, shivering, that safe meant something terrible. It meant going back to the woman I was before September, the woman who didn't listen for boots on the floor or count days between visits or know how anyone took their coffee, the woman who was useful and invisible and never once trembled when a door opened. I would lose him. But I would also lose her, the woman who felt, the woman who discovered she was full when she thought she was empty. And honestly, that was the loss I couldn't bear. My hand found the scarf in the dark. The wool was soft under my fingers, good wool, the kind that keeps warmth against skin. I thought about my mother, Sarah Whitlock, née Cooper, who married a soldier in 61 and watched him ride east toward the war. He wrote 3 letters, then he wrote nothing. She waited through 62 and 63 and 64, and when the war ended and the soldiers came home and he was not among them, she kept waiting. She waited until waiting became the shape of her life. A woman curved around an absence, growing into it the way a tree grows around a fence post, not because it chose to, but because it had nowhere else to go. Was that me? Was I my mother standing in the dark with my hand on a scarf? Waiting for a man who might never walk through my door again, I gripped the scarf, pulled it toward the edge of the shelf, and stopped. I couldn't do it. I told my hand to move and my hand refused, and I stood there in the moonlight with my arm outstretched and the scarf half pulled, and something inside me that was stronger than fear, stronger than sense, stronger than every rational argument I'd built. Something that said, you cannot unknow this. You cannot unfeel this. You can put the coffee back and fold the scarf away, but you will still be a woman who loves, and no amount of inventory management will change that. I let go of the scarf, pushed it back, smoothed the wool where my grip had creased it. I couldn't make myself hope, I whispered, but I couldn't make myself stop either. I went back upstairs, lay in the dark, listened to the bucket downstairs plink, 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 catching water, drop by drop, the way it had been catching me all along, and maybe that's enough. Dawn came slow, the way February dawns do in Montana, not a sunrise so much as a gradual surrender of the dark. Grey first, then silver, then a pale gold that crept across the floor like an apology for all the cold. I opened the store, same order, same motions, lamp, stove, bolt. I swept the front step even though it didn't need sweeping. I arranged the front counter even though I'd arranged it yesterday. I did not look at the door. I looked at the door. "Stop it, Beth," I muttered. Mid-morning came. Mrs. Patterson bought thread. The blacksmith's boy picked up nails his father had ordered. I smiled and measured and made change, and I was perfectly fine. I was a professional woman running a respectable counter, and I was absolutely not watching that door. 10:23, the bell rang, and the cold came in. Not the ordinary cold of a customer opening the door. This was different. This was the deep cold, the breaks country cold, the 40 miles of blizzard cold that carries the smell of snow and leather and distances most people can't imagine. Caleb McCoy stood in my doorway. God, I don't have words for what I felt. Or maybe I have too many. He looked like a man who'd fought the whole territory to stand in that spot. Frost in his beard, cheeks raw and wind-burned, his coat stiff with ice. And his boots, Lord. His boots were worn clean through at the soles, the leather cracked and split, showing wool sock underneath. In his hands cracked, swollen, frostbitten hands he held an oilcloth package, small, careful, wrapped like it was the most precious thing he'd ever carried. He set it on my counter. "Happy Valentine's Day, Miss Beth." His voice was rough, hoarse, like the cold had scraped it down to raw wood. I stared at him, at the frost, at the boots, at the hands that had carried that package through what? Through how much, how far did you walk, Caleb McCoy? He almost smiled. "A fair piece, ma'am." "How far? 40 miles, give or take." A pause. "Horse threw a shoe 12 miles out. Blizzard had the trail buried. I slept in a haystack one night, dug out the next." He looked down at the oilcloth on my counter. "Reckon I was coming regardless." "Your horse is he. Livery's got him. He ain't happy with me." The smallest flicker in those steady eyes. "But I reckon he understands." 40 miles, through waist-high snow, in a Montana blizzard, with boots that weren't built for walking and a body that wasn't built for this kind of cold. For a Valentine. For me. And here is where my story turns. Here is the moment, not his walking, not his arriving, but what I did next. My hand went to the counter. Fingers spread on the wood, the same wood I'd stood behind for 3 years, measuring and selling and smiling and hiding. The counter was my fortress, my barrier, the line between the woman the town saw and the woman I actually was. I felt the grain under my fingertips. Smooth, familiar, safe. I let go. I walked around the counter, 6 feet, maybe 7, the longest, shortest distance I have ever crossed. I stood in front of Caleb McCoy, close enough to see the ice crystals in his eyebrows, close enough to smell the smoke from the dugout and the hay from the stack and the cold, clean Montana air that clung to him like a second skin. I reached up and brushed the frost from his beard, my fingers against his jaw the first time I'd touched him, the first time I'd touched any man with intention in longer than I could remember. "Caleb," I said, not Mr. McCoy, just his name, just the truth. Then I turned to my shelf, took down the fresh Arbuckles, the bag I'd bought yesterday, the one I bought while telling myself I wouldn't. I brewed 2 cups. 2, not 1 for the customer while I worked the counter. 2 cups for 2 people. At the small table by the stove where I had never, not once, invited anyone to sit, I pulled out the chair for him. "Sit down, Caleb, you've walked far enough. I want to tell you about that morning. Not the whole of it, some things are private. And a woman is entitled to keep a few moments between herself and God and the man she pours coffee for. But I want to tell you what I discovered. because, well, because I think it might matter to someone like me, someone who's been standing behind her own counter, in whatever form that takes, saving the good coffee and pretending she doesn't know why. He sat at my table, his boots steamed by the stove lord. Those boots, barely holding together, the leather telling the story of every mile. His hands wrapped around the tin cup, and I watched the warmth come back into his fingers. Slow, the way feeling returns after it's been frozen out. I opened the oilcloth package. Inside was a card handwritten, on plain paper, in a hand that wasn't elegant but was careful. The kind of careful a man uses when every word costs him something. I won't tell you everything it said. But I'll tell you this, it was honest. No poetry, no fancy phrases, just a line writer's truth, written by lamplight in a shack at the edge of the world. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever held. You wrote this before the blizzard, I said. Yes, ma'am. You were coming anyway, storm or no storm. He looked at me over his coffee cup, those steady, quiet eyes. I reckon I was always coming. Miss Beth. Just took me a while to lace my boots. The bucket sat by the stove, full now, or near enough. Snowmelt and ceiling drips, gathered drop by drop over days and weeks of winter. Ordinary water, nothing remarkable about it, except that it was there, and it was full, and nobody had poured it. It just accumulated quietly. The way things do when you're not paying attention. Love doesn't always arrive the way the stories say on horseback. In sunshine, with declarations and certainty, sometimes it walks. Sometimes it limps in on frozen feet with its boots worn through, and it sets something small and honest on your counter and calls you Miss Beth in a voice scraped raw by wind. And sometimes love doesn't walk at all. Sometimes it stands behind a counter for 5 months, saving the good coffee, folding a scarf too carefully, asking about a horse because the man's voice goes soft when he talks about it, and just refusing to call any of it what it is. The town talked, they did. Mrs. Hargrove smiled. Mrs. Clary nodded once. Quiet, like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. Mrs. Caldwell pursed her lips so tight you could have used them as a clothespin. I found I didn't mind. I'd spent 3 years curating what other people saw when they looked at me. Competent Beth. Reliable Beth. Beth who don't need nobody. That morning, I let them see something different. A woman sitting at a table with a man, drinking coffee, and not hiding behind a single thing. The stove was warm. The Arbuckles was fresh, outside. Montana was still Montana, hard and cold and beautiful and unforgiving. But inside my store, at my table, with 2 cups steaming between us like a conversation we'd been having all along without words. Inside, it was spring. He stayed. I should tell you that he stayed. And every morning after, I poured his coffee and walked around the counter to hand it to him, because some distances you only need to cross once. I learned that love isn't always the man who walks 40 miles. Sometimes it's the woman who saves the good coffee and finally admits why.